welcome to LaunchPod, the show from the Innovation Launchpad network that takes on the acceleration of research in the UK. I'm your host, Paul Stimpson, and today we'll be hearing from our network director, Dr. Pete Osborne, on intellectual property, a really important subject for any budding researchers and residents out there. But before that, let me give you a quick introduction to the Innovation Launchpad network. The Innovation Launchpad Network Plus, funded by the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, the EPSRC, brings together leading universities, the Catapult Network, and regional innovation ecosystems and enriches the exchange of ideas and knowledge across these organisations. One of the ways we do that is through the Researcher in Residence scheme, and this really is a flagship activity for us as a network. For those who don't know, we award up to 50k to researchers in the UK whose research proposal fits within at least one of our key themes, which are net zero, resilience, and healthcare and wellbeing. These projects are awarded on a collaborative basis, meaning that it is a requirement for researchers to work alongside at least one of the catapults. You can find out more about the catapults and other details about the scheme over at innovationlaunchpad.ac.uk. So, Pete Osborne, thank you very much for joining me today. If you'd like to introduce yourself, I'm pretty sure everyone will be aware of who you are, but on the off chance that people don't know who you are, please can you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Paul. My name's Pete Osborne. I'm currently the Senior Research Fellow at the University of Sheffield's Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, and I'm also the Director of the Innovation Launchpad Network Plus. Going back a few years, I'm also a UK Patent Office registered IP Health Check Advisor. So the Innovation Launchpad Network has been running for just over a year now, and we were set up to provide to provide funding for activities to link up academics from across the UK's universities and link them up with the 9 catapult centres. And really we're there to do that, to help to create impact from academic researchers' work by providing them access to the data, to the facilities, and to the expertise that exists across the catapult network. And we do that across 3 themes. So our themes are net zero, resilience, and also healthcare and well-being.
Okay, so the topic of today's podcast is going to be about intellectual property. This went down really well at the induction day that we held for the researchers in residence for our first tranche that we did. And I think it's just a case of expanding on that and making sure that anybody who weren't there or any future researchers in residence might want to know about this. So, Pete, why is IP important?
I think lots of people will have heard about intellectual property or IP, but perhaps many people don't know what all the different forms are. They don't know when they're creating it as part of their work. And perhaps also they won't have really thought about protecting it, or when it might be important to protect it, or when potentially it doesn't need to be protected. So there are actually many different forms of IP. You might be thinking the obvious ones about patents, copyright, and trademarks, but they're just the protectable forms of IP. And when we're thinking about the knowledge that we're creating as part of research projects, we've always got to think about, well, what's the new knowledge that's being created as part of this work? What IP might be associated with it? And also, what might we need to do to think about protecting it in the future? And that's quite important for these projects because they're collaborative. We've got academics from UK universities working with people at the Catapult network. And both of those parties are going to be bringing what's known as background IP, so IP that's been generated prior to the start of a project. And they're hopefully going to be developing that. They're going to be developing new understanding, and that's going to create new foreground IP, or IP that's created during this project. And because it's being created in a collaborative way, we've got 2 different parties, the university that the academic works for and the Catapult Network, who are each going to have perhaps a slightly different view of the world in terms of what they might want to do with that IP. Historically, academics have always been striving to get their work published, and that puts that IP out into the public domain. And that's obviously that's great if you want to share that IP, But because it's in the public domain, that IP then isn't protectable, because hopefully everyone that's read those papers or that's seen those presentations is now aware of it. In a commercial sense, though, there might be situations where we want to protect that IP. And that could be either done via one of the formal protection routes, so we might patent an idea or a concept, or we might think about putting a trademark in place, or use something called copyright to protect the particular combination of words used in an article. But we could also go down the route of utilising trade secrets. And if we're thinking about trade secrets, basically we're deciding not to publicly disseminate that work so that either an individual or an organisation can take advantage of it. And each one of those routes has got different advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, if you're going down a formal route, you're getting a legally enforceable protection around that IP. But as part of that, you have to tell everyone about everything that you've done as part of that work. If you go down the trade secrets route, you don't get a legally enforceable right to use that knowledge, but equally you haven't told anyone about it. And that can be quite important, because for some technical developments, the act of telling someone how you've done something highlights the problem that you've solved to get there, and it might be quite easy to work around that. Whereas if you don't announce what you've done, then nobody else has found out about it, and they haven't had their eyes opened to the ideas that you've been developing your new knowledge around. So it's quite important to think about those things. And from a researchers in residence perspective, because they're collaborative, it's really important that you have a conversation about which of those routes you might want to take amongst all of the parties involved in the project. So talking to your catapult hosts, talking to the university that you work with, and really thinking about the options that are available to you.
Cool, great, yeah. So in terms of practical requirements, again, this is something we covered in the induction day, but yeah, some of the practical requirements for academics moving forward.
Yeah, so there's a whole variety of different approaches that you might take, and I've talked about the difference between some of the formally protectable ones and trade secrets already. But what we might want to think about is if we identify some IP that can be turned into a commercial product later, then we might want to think about, well, how might that be used? Now, in the first instance, we probably want to ensure that we've not commercialised that idea, or we've not publicly shared that idea too early, because really, if you're setting up a company to do that, you want that first mover advantage. You want to be first to market. So thinking about that route and actually what the different steps are. And there are actually two different routes that you can take there. You can obviously try and license that IP to a third party. You might know somebody who might be able to take advantage of it already. Or the alternative approach is that you can create a spin-out company, so a new company that fulfills a gap in the market to commercialise that IP. And most universities will have a department or a team within their commercial team who will do that. So it's always worth talking to your academic institution and finding out who to talk to there, and also what support they might have available to them, because it's actually in the university's interests to do that, because they're looking to benefit either from the profits from that new spin-out company that you're setting up, or the license fee that they might derive from licensing that to other companies. And again, you need to think about, well, how might that interact with the catapult that you're working with, and what's that potentially the rights sharing agreement that needs to be in place. And that's something that we definitely recommend people factor into the collaboration agreement that you all are hopefully working up with the catapult as part of your projects. It's also quite important to point out that actually, if you're going to commercialise the IP from your project, it actually doesn't preclude other academic activities like publication. But it's really important that you discuss these with the catapult that you're working with as you go along. And you also should be aware of any background IP that might have been disclosed to you by the catapult, and think about, well, actually, is it right to share that in those academic publications? And that's particularly important if you're working with an existing data set that the catapult might have developed over a course of number of months or number of years. And potentially they may not want that data set getting out into the public domain. So it's always worth having those conversations with them, thinking about what IP both you and the catapult are bringing to the table as part of this project, and just really being open and honest with each other about what you might want to do in the future, and how you might want to disseminate or take advantage of the new knowledge that's being created as part of the project. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions about IP and how they relate to their Researcher in Residence project, then feel free to drop me an email, either to the standard Researcher in Residence applications email address, or to my personal email address. It's well out in the public domain now, there's no protection of this, which is p.osborne@sheffield.ac.uk.
And you can find more information about the scheme and the rest of our network's activities on innovationlaunchpad.ac.uk. So that brings to a close the main segment on IP. A couple of AOBs, any other business. Tranche 3 launch date, we have, well, by the time this podcast goes out, it'll be 5 weeks or so until the launch of Tranche 3 of our Researchers in Residence scheme. This one is a little bit different to the first two because perhaps there'll be a little bit less time, won't there, for researchers to...
Yeah, there'll be less time for researchers to complete their projects this time. So you really need to think about a plan of activities that will get you finished before the end of the grant and the scheme.
Another thing I want to cover on these podcasts is any kind of frequent questions that we get asked. A couple that we've had in the inbox is about if I'm changing institutions in the coming months, but I still want to apply for this scheme, does that affect my application? So I guess a word on that.
Yeah, I think the key thing to consider there is you need to have the time available in your schedule to be able to do this project. So if you're changing institutions, it's always worth checking with your new institution that you're going to have that time available to you, and they're not expecting you to have other commitments. From our perspective, it's largely just an admin exercise to change the grant over from one university to another. But obviously it is important that you've got that time set aside to do the work. So we'd recommend that you check with your new institution that is the case. I think the only thing to add now is to say that actually we've been blown away by the quality and the quantity of applications that we've received this time, and it's given us a real challenge. We've got to obviously review all of these, and hopefully they'll turn it into some really good projects with the Catapult network over the next couple of years. So I'd like to thank everybody that has submitted an application so far, and we should be announcing which of those have been successful towards the end of September. And hopefully you'll all be kicking off your new projects in the new year just after Christmas, and getting underway and creating some great new work, and hopefully creating some great new knowledge as well.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing the outputs of those projects. So yeah, thank you very much for your time today, Pete.
Thank you, Paul.
So hopefully you found that really interesting from Pete there. Obviously a bit of an expert in intellectual property and how that relates to early careers researchers and taking your projects forward either in a commercialization route or, as Pete mentioned, in a trade secrets route. As always, keep up to date with our activities on social media, which is Innovation Launchpad Network Plus on Twitter, LinkedIn and YouTube. Our website is updated daily too on innovationlaunchpad.ac.uk, where you can find projects from Tranche 1 of the scheme already published. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll be back again with another podcast next month.